Between 1933 and 1945, the organization of the Luftwaffe underwent several changes. Originally, the German Military High Command, for their air warfare forces, decided to use an organizational structure similar to the Army and Navy, treating the aviation branch as a strategic weapon of war. Later on, during the period of rapid rearmament, the Luftwaffe was organized more in a geographical fashion. Under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was prohibited from having an air force. With the former German Empire's Luftstreitkräfte disbandment in 1920, German pilots were secretly trained for military aviation, first in the Soviet Union during the late 1920s, and then in Germany in the early 1930s. In Germany, the training was done under the guise of the German Air Sports Association, at the Central Commercial Pilots School. The formation of the German Air Arm was openly announced in February 1935, with Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring as its commander-in-chief, in blatant defiance of the Versailles Treaty. Initial plans were for long-term growth of the Luftwaffe over a period of 5 years, with the intention of using the Luftwaffe as a strategic force. These plans were changed several times, especially after the June 1936 death of Walter Weaver and the succession of Ernst Udet. The focus and role of the Luftwaffe became one of ground support for the German army during its lightning war campaigns. Göring, using his political capital, was able to get significant resources allocated to the Luftwaffe, more so than the army or the navy. This made the Luftwaffe one of the most powerful forces in Europe during its initial years. Partly due to its ground support role, the Luftwaffe was reorganized in a fashion similar to the army units, with one unit controlling a specific area. Each Luftwaffe unit was self-contained and had complete control over all aspects of Luftwaffe forces in that area. Before becoming head of the Luftwaffe, Göring was Interior Minister of Prussia. In this position he had formed his own army, starting from a 400-men police department to regiment size. When Göring took over the Luftwaffe, he brought the regiment along with him to the Luftwaffe and created his own ground forces in the form of Luftwaffe field divisions and paratrooper regiments under the Luftwaffe. He eventually included a tank regiment, flak units and a signals regiment under the Luftwaffe umbrella. Formation and expansion. During the 1930s and 1940s, air power had not matured enough to be considered a dominant weapon of war. Unlike the other two forces, air power did not have past experience to draw upon. This resulted in the Air Force having to learn from experience rather than the classroom. There were no cohesive ideas for the organization of a structured, modern Air Force. One train of thought subordinated the Air Force to the Army in support of land operations and to the Navy for maritime tasks. It would be staffed by soldiers or sailors trained to fly. The second theory envisioned a centralized, well-organized Air Force to be used as a weapon of war, like the Army and Navy. German aviators from World War I followed this thought process. Since they had the backing of the German political leadership, this is how the Luftwaffe was originally conceived and formed. Following the tradition of putting a soldier in charge of the army and a sailor in charge of the navy, an aviator was designated to lead the Luftwaffe. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, also the cabinet minister for aviation. Göring formed a Luftwaffe High Command for operational management. Within the German Air Force leadership, the general opinion was that the Luftwaffe was a tactical rather than a strategic air force. Hence, in order to support the various army groups, the Luftwaffe was organized in similar fashion to the army. Its units had a flexible composition, with sub-units being added or removed when necessary. These sub-units tended to be semi-autonomous and highly mobile. This offered the flexibility required to support the ground units. From the start of the Spanish Civil War, the Luftwaffe was in action continuously without the time for rest or training. Multiple political acts and the consequent need for a show of strength forced the Luftwaffe to be in a perpetual state of readiness. This did not allow time for organizational strategy. Göring complicated the hierarchy by bringing the paratrooper and flak corps under his command. Due to his political differences with the army leadership, he raised his own police force as Prussian Minister of the Interior. This later became the Paratroop Tank Corps. By September 1939, the Luftwaffe had a total of 4,000 aircraft and 400,000 personnel. This strength had grown to 1,700,000 by 1941. In total, 571,000 of these were in anti-aircraft units and another 18% were in the signals branch. Only 36% or 588,000 comprised aircrew, but this also included the aircraft maintenance personnel. At the end of the war on 8 May 1945, more than 97,000 aircrew would be reported dead, wounded or missing. Organizational levels. All aspects of aviation, including the Luftwaffe, came under the control of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the Reich Air Ministry. Since the Luftwaffe was one of the three armed forces, it came under the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces from a military command point of view. Göring was the cabinet minister of aviation during most of this period. He also served as the Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe. As a cabinet minister, he was responsible for civil aviation and all aspects of aircraft manufacturing and supply. Operationally, the Luftwaffe command was shared by the Inspector of Combat Flight and the Inspector of Fighters along with the Secretary of State for Aviation. The German Air Force was divided into three operational branches: flying troops, anti-aircraft artillery, air signal troops. These three branches were further divided into sub-branches such as paratroops, air engineering, air medical corps and air crew. Since the Luftwaffe was organized in a geographical fashion rather than on a strategic functional basis, it had an independent administrative as well as an operational command structures. Each geographical area had its own supply and maintenance corps. For this reason, any aviation units moving within that geographical area did not need to carry its own maintenance staff. This allowed for a great deal of mobility within the Luftwaffe. Strategically, all three German military forces were part of a single service called the defensive power, to defend, and German Die Macht, the power, might, controlled by the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. The head of the OKW was part of the cabinet. Within the OKW, each service was headed by its own operational command: Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force, Commander-in-Chief of the Navy. The top levels of control of the Luftwaffe resided with the RLM, the German Air Ministry and its operational branch, the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, or Air Force High Command. These institutions together were responsible for the direction of research, production and overall maintenance of aircraft. As head of the Luftwaffe, Göring was responsible for the overall war effort and for the resources sent to a particular region. As a cabinet minister, he was able to get significant resources and personnel allocated to the Luftwaffe compared to other branches of the armed forces. In 1945, close to the end of the war, Robert Ritter von Greim replaced Göring as Commander-in-Chief. Operational. The OKL, as the operational branch of the RLM, had complete control over unit movements, formation and personnel transfers. It had a strength of 25,000 personnel in 1939. On an operational level, the Luftwaffe was divided into air fleets. Not entirely unlike the nearly contemporary United States Army Air Corps and USAAF numbered air forces. Each air fleet was responsible for a particular geographic region. They were self-contained units equipped with all types of aircraft and their own supply elements, maintenance staff, administration and legal departments. At the start of the war, the Luftwaffe had 4 Luftflotten, each responsible for roughly a quarter of Germany. As the war progressed, 3 more were created as the areas under German rule expanded. Luftflotte 5 was created in 1940 to direct operations in Norway and Denmark. The commander of each Luftflotte was responsible for all fighter as well as support operations within that region. A fighter leader was responsible for fighter operations within that region and reported to the commander. Each Luftflotte in turn was divided into many air districts and air corps. The purpose of a Luftgau was to provide administrative and logistical support to each airfield, whereas the Flieger Corps controlled all operational matters. The Luftgau headquarters command consisted of one general major and a staff of 50 to 100 officers. Each Flieger Corps would have a number of units under its command. These were usually several wings, but sometimes also specialized squadrons and battle groups. Tactical. Each Geschwader within the Flieger Corps was roughly the size of an RAF wing, with about 90 to 120 aircraft under its command. These numbers varied as subunits were added or removed. Each wing had a particular task and were mostly equipped with aircraft appropriate to that task. Other types of aircraft were also sometimes attached. A Geschwader was commanded by a Geschwader Commodore, with the rank of either a major, lieutenant colonel or colonel. The unit also had other staff officers with administrative duties such as the German adjutant, technical and operations officers. These were usually experienced aircrew still flying on operations. Other specialist staff were navigation, signals and intelligence personnel. A headquarters flight or was attached to each Geschwader. Strategic level Oberkommando der Luftwaffe. The OKW was the highest in the military command structure. It was responsible for the coordinated effort of the three military arms. It was headed by Wilhelm Keitel after he took over from War Minister Werner von Blumberg in 1938. Since the head of the Luftwaffe, Göring, was also a cabinet minister, any Luftwaffe operational orders would come from Hitler to him, who would pass them on to Luftwaffe leaders, bypassing the OKW. On 5 February 1944, through the efforts of Gunther Korten and Karl Koller, the Luftwaffe High Command was formed. Colonel General Hans Jeschonek was appointed Chief of Staff of the OKL. This created a military command out of the all-encompassing Reich Air Ministry, controlling all aspects of aviation. The OKL covered general as well as operational staff of the Luftwaffe. The following parts of the Luftwaffe were under its command: the General Staff, Operational Staff, Weapons Inspectorates, Inspector of Fighters, Supply and Equipment, a Signals Division. The other components, such as armament and aircraft manufacturing, remained under the control of the RLM. The OKL was led by the Chief of the General Staff. It was strategically divided into 8 directorates numbered consecutively. The directorates were: Operations Directorate, Organization Directorate, Training Directorate, Troop Movement Directorate, Intelligence Directorate, Equipment and Supply Directorate, Historical Archives Directorate, Personnel Management Directorate. There were also 17 inspectorates: Luftwaffe Inspection 1 Reconnaissance, Luftwaffe Inspection 2 Bombers and Dive Bombers, Luftwaffe Inspection 3 Fighter, Destroyer, Ground Support and Weaponry, Luftwaffe Inspection 5 Air Safety and Equipment, Luftwaffe Inspection 6 Motor Vehicles, Luftwaffe Inspection 7 Signal Communications, Luftwaffe Inspection 8 Naval Aircraft, Luftwaffe Inspection 9 Pilot Training Schools, Luftwaffe Inspection 10 Troop Service and Training, Luftwaffe Inspection 11 Parachute and Air Landing Forces, Luftwaffe Inspection 12 Navigation, Luftwaffe Inspection 13 Air Defense, Luftwaffe Inspection 14 Medical, Luftwaffe Inspection 15 Air Defense Zones, Luftwaffe Inspection 16 Air Sea Rescue Services under the umbrella of Sea Rescue Service German, Seenotdienst. Luftwaffe Inspection 17 Construction Troops and Prisoners of War, Luftwaffe Inspection 18 Luftwaffe Field Units,